Welcome to Upwards, sponsored by the Microsoft Aspire Experience, where we share stories and insights to help you grow 1% better in your personal and professional life every episode. Here are your hosts for today's episode, Jake Hewson and Alex Kessel.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Kessel, coming at you from Customer Success with Microsoft, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Hey everyone, this is Jake Hewson. Don't be fooled by Alex going first. He's actually my sidekick. What episode we got for him today, Alex?
We have got an awesome discussion on pursuing contribution, a culture of contribution versus careerism, and what that looks like as we work within tech and really anyone's life as they consider what they value and what they spend their time on. I think it's an awesome discussion.
And I'll tell you all the phrase that many of you are probably familiar with, 2 birds, 1 stone. After this interview, I will probably never think of that saying the same way ever again. So
too true.
Give it a listen, and I can almost guarantee you will all feel the same. Hope you all enjoy the episode. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for being here for this episode. Today, we have an awesome guest. We are accompanied by Leah Shin. Hey, Leah, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and what you do just for the audience, just so they can get to know you a little better?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me here. Super excited. So a little bit about myself is, I'm Leah Shin. I am currently a product marketing manager at Microsoft. So I spent, the first year or so in M365 consumer research, and now I'm in a dual marketing role where I do inbound PMM work for the Windows Insider program, and also outbound for storytelling demos, which is pretty much all consumer product storytelling, which has been pretty busy here at Microsoft. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me at Microsoft. But, outside of Microsoft, I do a couple of projects with friends. So Gender Vendor, Now Spoke, Bespoken are a few. And I forgot to mention my pronouns. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Very cool. Wow. So you've got a few things going on outside the busy season at Microsoft here. That's super cool. I'm curious, how long have you been working on those projects about?
Yes. So the projects particularly outside of Microsoft?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've kind of started these kind of social projects ever since I was a high school student, actually. So, senior year, junior year of high school, I started this kind of community organization called Literacy for Love, which is my kind of first experience starting something with friends. But essentially, I was an English language learner student growing up. And I realized that a lot of these students didn't have books at home. So I set a goal to find a way where we can bring books to these students. And we raised over, $55,000 worth of books. And that was my first way on understanding wow, we can actually solve a community challenge or opportunity that we see. And so from that moment onwards, college, undergrad, I went to University of Washington, Bothell, and I told myself every single year in school, I would actually work on a new project with friends. And so it started with identifying that medium-sized businesses didn't have a lot of marketing opportunity. So we created an app that was kind of like Tinder. You can swipe to find a small business close to you that you can support based off your geolocation. And as the years went on, a new project focused on Asian American Pacific Islander history, which is actually May coming soon, which is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And then pop-up vending machine, do kind of a phone app for students to find local events, and so on and so forth. So it's always been there. The recent projects that I've done, I've kind of either continued the ones I did in college, which is 2 of them, but I also started with a new one with Microsoft folks, early in career folks, to kind of solve the issue that we were super passionate about, which is in education.
That's awesome. That's so neat that, as you've coming out of high school, having been able to identify one need, it kind of became this recurring cycle for you and a habit. I'm curious, when you're finding a new project or when you're thinking of a new problem, what is your framework that you're using really when you identify a problem, right? 'Cause if people want to start kind of making this little impact, how do you find these areas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think a lot of people ask the similar question, how do you even start? How do you identify something? I think for me, all these projects kind of stem from either experiencing something or seeing something happen to peers or community members. And one thing that I really realized is I've also participated in a lot of like civic kind of technology ways or ways to kind of connect with community members. So even in middle school, high school time, I was part of the Mill Creek Teen Advisory Board. So we actually got to understand like local community challenges, even as like a middle school student, seeing different challenges happening every day. And then kind of that continued throughout high school and college and student government. And so I think like talking to people, understanding how people have different perspectives and backgrounds really inspired a lot of the projects that I've done with friends. And I think it's really special because we actually hear kind of the pain points that folks are experiencing.
So I'm curious, Leah, like, I think we find that a lot of people tend to maybe over focus like on their role or just looking at like a linear trajectory in their specific role that they're in. Like, how do you think our work mindsets are affected by the pressure of a competitive workplace in big tech? And do you think that takes away from people's desires or thoughts of all the different things they could do outside of work to add value or even outside of their direct role?
You know, since I've been at Microsoft for about a year or so now, year and a half, I would want to say. So this is like my first job outside of college. I find that when I first started Microsoft, I was super thankful because of the culture here as a company kind of fosters that community piece, which naturally pulled me in to Microsoft as a top company I would want to work at, you know, post-graduation, just the values and the community piece and being raised in the greater Seattle area. It's kind of full circle, seeing my parents' friends who used to work, parents used to work there, and now me working there and seeing like how great the company is in terms of the social impact side. But one of the things I did struggle with when I first kind of started like 3 or 6 months in was, you know, if I take away being on Microsoft, like what am I left with? Like, who am I as a person? Is there more to me than just the company I work at, even though it's so great and it really does align with my values? And so I think that's a question that I started to ask myself because I was kind of in this weird space where I was trying to have the company I work at kind of fill in all my passion areas or things that I want to fulfill in my life that brings me happiness and joy and excitement, right? And I kept on trying to make Microsoft be all that, which it did fulfill a lot of it. But I realized like me as a person, you know, I do want to kind of form my identity outside of that. And I think that's a piece of advice that I give a lot of early in career people or even just mentors who have been at the company for a very long time who are trying to figure out their hobbies and passions outside of it. Because like you both mentioned, you know, it's such a great place, corporate tech, to kind of fall in love with and want to stay there for a very long time. But again, that's something that I encourage myself and other folks to start thinking about even more.
That's such a powerful question to say, what take away Microsoft and what are you or who are you? You know, I mean, I can't imagine being asked that if I'd been at the company for 20 years. I think I'm glad that I'm being asked that question now because that would be a lot more challenging to face that one down if there wasn't much, I think. So, I mean, to prevent that sort of situation where we're really over-focused on the identity in Microsoft, you've clearly kind of set up a precedent of always being aware and involved in the local community. We mentioned civic activity and stuff like that. I mean, you've got your finger on the pulse here. And that's expanded probably over time for you as you started with a small thing that you were very aware of with the language learning and moved upward. So what if we're missing that one thing right now? You know, how would you identify and pick one thing to start, you know, focusing on if you were starting over as somebody who was, you know, really involved in Microsoft, but not quite outside yet?
I think my projects are very different, you know, kind of looking back. I think the ones I'm working on now, I mentioned that, you know, 3 of them, you know, one of them is a pop-up vending machine that kind of supports women businesses in Seattle to kind of helping early in career and students find their career path to, you know, the Asian American Pacific Islander representation that I mentioned. And so what I have to say for folks who are wanting to kind of start their passion projects or even just like case study on something to explore is think about that one key, you know, topic or issue or something in the news that really makes them not angry, but excited to explore more to solve for it. And talk about that type of passion and desire with different friends, coworkers, and even family members and see like which ones also shares that same excitement with you. And I realized after conversation, I think a lot of my friends and family are maybe annoyed at this point where I'm like, I think this is what we need to be working on next. You want to join in? That's when I started identifying like, wow, like a lot of my people around me actually have a very similar like-minded kind of passion and desire to jump on board. How can we do it together and make it fun and make it exciting and hold each other accountable? And I also realize now, like looking at new projects I want to do in the future, which I have a bunch that I've written down, like literally on my whiteboard right here, is like I can name probably like 6 to 10 people that I want to reach out to that I've met over the course of the year or two that I'm like, you are great at design, like you're great at photography, like you're great at website design. Like, how do we all get together and like make it great? And so I've learned to identify those people that share that same passion and pitch why they would be so great to join this project. And I want to say like 8 out of 10 times it works. Like all of them kind of jump on board. And luckily and thankfully, we're able to do it together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think there's two kind of thoughts and questions that pop up based on that. And I think like I was going to ask, do you forward think and are you future thinking about other projects you want to do? And you already answered that one in terms of it seems like you have a list of like 6+ things that you think you could be doing. And I think it's so cool how you mentioned recruiting those right people and kind of finding that. So I'd love to, I guess, dive deeper into the first part in terms of, I know you have some future projects that you're thinking about, but do you have like a dream project or like out of those 6 or so, like, do you have one that's like, wow, this is like, I would really love to do this?
Yeah. I think that's a challenge that I've also experienced a lot is kind of being married to one project because I love exploring and trying new things. And that's just who I am. Like, I don't want to say I get bored easily, but I just love tackling new types of questions and challenges and then pivoting really quickly to something else. So right now, I probably will change, but I'm really interested in kind of pop-up experiences and like, how do you create experience that's immersive physically, but also through digital technology? And how do you create that and, create a really meaningful way to kind of raise awareness for different things? And so it's kind of like a teaser on some of the new things that I'm speaking with a couple other friends of mine right now, and really wanting to explore that. And actually, I'm starting grad school fall 2021. I'm part-time at UW Seattle for human-centered design engineering. And so
Nice.
I'm hoping that program will also help me gain the skills to work on more passion projects like this while also working at Microsoft or wherever I work next.
So Leah, you've mentioned finding like-minded people to work towards these side projects and passions with. Would you recommend finding people for these projects or just striking out solo to get started?
Yeah, I think for me in particular, in terms of working alone or working with people, I find it for myself that I love working with people. And maybe that's just because the way that I've just valued community and understanding that I also don't have all the skill set to launch something individually. I know my strengths, but I also know my weaknesses. And I love understanding how I can be around people that can either teach me something new or inspire me in a different way, or even challenge me to think about something differently. And so for me, a lot of the projects I've done have always been rooted with people. I think some of the projects have started individually. I think probably many of them have started as just maybe an idea I wrote in my notebook or journal. But at the end of the day, I've always pitched that idea to just, a handful of people to see what they think. And some of those people ended up having those skills that I, didn't have, that I want to learn from. And we were able to build something better together. And I think there was this question that some people also ask me, like, how do you find that balance between the projects and work and everything that you do? And I tell them, when I work on these passion projects outside of work, I don't even view them as work or even projects. They're really fun ways for me to work with my friends and have a good time. So some of the times, like, we were together, obviously we're in COVID, it's remote, like we have a drink or so and we're talking about different topics. Sometimes we, go out and get food or, have a picnic outside and have a good time. So, there's a saying like you can kill two birds with one stone. For me, like I love saying like you can feed two birds with one scone. And so it's like really positive, but like literally it's that kind of, it's some mindset of doing that together and finding a lot of fulfillment in that with the relationships I have with others.
So Leah, something that I want to follow up with outside of the clear power behind the mindset shift to feeding two birds with one stone, really looking at how can I capture all of my activity and turn it into a maximized impact into my community. I think that's what that means to me. I know on a personal note, I feel often torn between my capability to do those projects and the desire or need to be fulfilled in my career or try to move forward my career, especially since sometimes my wires don't cross as easily. Like, in your role, you have a design aspect and a product aspect that's awesome. And that doesn't really exist for myself and other people who, it's a change of pace between our work and then what I do on projects. So what I'm curious to hear is, was there a time where you chose your career over your projects? Did it feel fulfilling, or is there a time, maybe the flip side of this, depending on how you want to answer it, was there a time that you chose your project over a career progression move and it still ended well? Or, describe an experience like that. I'd love to hear a story around that.
So context, like I've been working in corporate tech, like all throughout my pretty much undergrad experience as well, like interning part-time. Mm-hmm. So I've always balanced all of my community projects and working at least part-time as a student. So student is already like a full-time job. I worked part-time also on campus, did my community projects, and also interned part-time during school.
So you had a lot of free time.
I definitely had a lot of free time. And the reason why I did that, especially undergrad, was my mindset was, one, I didn't want to graduate with student loans. So I wanted to ensure like I could pay for my education by myself. And so that was something that I was really proud of. And I was looking for opportunity to, gain the corporate skill set or just like skill set as a professional, but also understand how I can make the most out of my student experience too, which I feel like I've really made the most out of it. And so when I graduated and worked full time, I think that's where I had to kind of understand, okay, like how do I succeed in this setting, in this corporate setting full time? That's my full time role, but also how do I balance the projects that I'm doing? And so as I really thought about it, I kind of formed the game plan for myself. And I did something very similar in college too. But in the corporate setting full time, I really wanted to prioritize doing well at Microsoft, focusing that 100%. I wanted to understand, who are my allies? Who can I lean on? How can I build community at Microsoft? And I really wanted to feel comfortable there. Because, my family, like I'm the first one really to work in a corporate setting. And so I also didn't have a lot of guidance on what that really meant as well. So I really wanted to find those allies and mentors first. Once I did that about, I want to say 3 months in, I slowly started to scope out like what more can I do to build that community outside of Microsoft. And so I started to slowly and surely pick up one project, 2, 3, 4, and then kind of find that balance between the two. And so in terms of choosing one over the other, like a promotion or a cool new role, always try to find that equal balance where I'm able to succeed in sometimes both, but it is challenging to find that balance. And I feel like maybe my college undergrad experience helped a lot there because I was just balancing so many different things and having to be really organized and sacrifice maybe fun activities with friends over other things so I can get the best of both worlds. So I would say that would be that. And the last thing that really put the ribbon on top of this experience was probably finding managers, mentors, friends, the people that I surrounded myself with that like really supported what I wanted to do and where my passions really rested upon. So even if my role didn't fulfill like this part of what I would love to do, like I told my manager, like, hey, like, this is what I really like. Like, I'm working on this pop-up vending machine, focus on women history, women storytelling for local businesses. This is what I do. And, they were supportive of that. And so that is why I'm grateful as well and able to kind of do what I'm doing today.
I love how you said, like, it's not always easy, and you try to feed the two birds with one scone. I knew I had to use that saying, but it's not always easy, and you hope that you can get that progression in both areas. But it sounds like regardless if you're able to progress in work, role specific, as well as side projects at the same time, even the times you're not, it still sounds like you are feeling that inner fulfillment. And to me, that is what I think so much of us are seeking at the end of the day, is that just overall fulfillment out of X role or X company. Who am I? So it sounds like you've had a lot of that fulfillment, which is amazing.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll say to that point is I think a lot of the projects I do outside of work also help me build my brand in work, if that makes sense. So it just kind of all tied together, and I wasn't even planning it to kind of align that way. But as I kind of proved that I could do my work well, and people understood, like, okay, Leah can get her work done and she's, doing a great job so far. And I started to open more about like my passions outside of work. That only helped my career, I feel, because I was able to be my true self at work and kind of show others, like, this is what I love outside, that really relate, and kind of foster even a greater feeling of like who I could be at work, also outside too.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful to understand that it's not either or exclusively, but the work that you're kind of investing into, the other things you're passionate about, you can bring into work, and you can show other people and say, hey, look, I did this thing. And, if they're excited about it, then there are people you can talk with in the future and build your network and brand even further. And, eventually one of them may go, hey, I heard X, Y, and Z opened up at Microsoft along those lines. This sounds like you. It sounds like you, and I'm going to tell the manager it sounds like you, right? And I think that's something in our careers and lives that, it's not just doing the job that you have, it's doing the job you have, and not to be cliche, but the job you want, right? But because it's not progression, but rather because you're contributing to the greater culture and environment where you are, which I think is really cool. So Leah, I'm going to ask the impossible question. You've given us several takeaways. If you were going to give us just kind of a one sentence walk away power statement for what somebody listening can go do, what would it be?
Ooh, like one statement. Let me think about that. I feel like one thing that people can do today is, I feel like, take the time to reflect on what is that one passion area, that one thing that gets them super mad or excited or feel some type of way outside of work that they want to start exploring more. And when I say explore more, that could be researching, secondary research, like what's going on in the world today. That could be talking to a friend or family member about that passion area and seeing where that grows. And I think, the last thing is sketch it out, start kind of putting your idea on paper and seeing where it can take you. I mean, it's really that first step, right? I'm sure all of you have that one thing that you're like, oh, like, it's always on the back of my mind. It's always top of mind. It's always there, So that's the time where you can do that one thing. And I feel like you don't know where it'll go. And it's okay if it doesn't go anywhere, but all you can say is that you tried and you did put something out there, and it's okay if it doesn't go anywhere too.
Yeah. So, wow. Thanks so much for that, Leah. Thanks so much for the time, and this short period of time you've given so much insight and info for our listeners. So thanks so much for being here for this episode, and we really appreciate everything you've given us.
Cool. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here and super excited to hear more of your shows coming up too.
Well, we weren't lying about the two birds with one stone change. I think the mindset shift that's tied to feeding two birds with one scone is really powerful, because it conjures an image of all my activity, all my actions go to feeding something, go to growing something. And so the question is, what are you growing? And are there ways you can do two at once? Right? Because Leah clearly illustrated how, what she's doing at work applies to so many other areas of her life, and challenging us to find that ideal and then match our actions our time at work to those things to kind of 2x the effect, so to speak, was really powerful.
Yeah, I love that, Alex. And something that I'd been thinking about ever since you mentioned it, and something that I think will stick with me, is what Leah mentioned about the things she's doing outside of work. By being vocal about them internally at Microsoft, here where she works, she's been able to also progress in her career and make connections. And that's something to me that's so cool, that just think about it. Leah's done so many cool things, but imagine if she just never told anyone about them, or no one even knows what she's done. But by being vocal about her interests outside of Microsoft, even if it's not a one-to-one match, I think that has really helped elevate her career. And I like to think of it like, imagine doing a math problem, but you don't show your work. No one knows how you did it or what you did. So I think it's cool that Leah has been able to show her work for the things she's done outside of Microsoft internally to help progress her career.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode, and we can't wait to see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Upwards. Be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform and leave us a review. Learn more about the Microsoft Aspire experience at aka.ms/Microsoft Aspire experience. We'll catch you next time on Upwards.